Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting for capital expenditures. Today is Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. On the agenda for this evening's meeting, we're going to talk about streets and traffic capital needs. I did want to touch a little bit on housekeeping, though, before we start off. We've had a few members join us in the past week, and I did want to I just got a message on the Zoom here. Start my video. And I did want to call attention to where you can find material from the previous meetings. They're located on the city's website. I'm just going to jump over there really quickly. If you can see that on your screen, this is the city's website. If you go to the budget division through departments and agencies, click on budget division, and you jump to capital committee, all the documents you need here that we've covered up to date, and all the supporting materials are on this website. You can see our first meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee was on the 19th of October, and you can see that the various materials as well as the agenda. Couple of items I wanted to point to. There's a capital improvements budget guide. It gives you a lot of basic information about the city's capital budget and funding sources and uses. And then there's also what we are focusing on in these next few weeks are the capital needs inventory. And that is a document that's put together through the Board of Public Service after consulting with various departments, and they assemble those needs and they put together based on critical, needed, and desirable categories, and by streets and parks and various categories of city government. And last week was our first meeting with one of the departments, which was parks. So you'll see that presentation also on the website. And then, but tonight, what we're going to go over is the street department. And we did have Bethany Williams, Director of Streets, scheduled to appear. I just got informed within the last half hour that she was not going to be able to make it. But we do have with us tonight Jamie Wilson, the Traffic Commissioner of the Department of Streets, as well as Kent Flake, the Street Commissioner. And so what I would like to do is bring them up, and I'll pull up their presentation, if you will, and then there they are, smiling faces, and we can start with the streets, discussing some of those street projects. So, guys, I'm gonna give it up to you, and then also, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat, and we'll get to them before we end the presentation. So, take it away, guys.
Thanks, Paul. Are you able to hear me, Paul? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, just checking. New computer here for this. So again, this is Jamie Wilson, Commissioner of Traffic for City of St. Louis Street Department. The first project we have here is the traffic signal timing detection. The project we envision will be that we'd hire consultant engineers to optimize and implement new traffic signal timing on our city arterials, the major routes through the city. Most agencies do that on a 5 to 7, most major agencies do that on a 5 to 7 year frequency. We haven't done it or had the staff or funding to do something like that in over a dozen years. So like paving, you'll hear about later, we're past due for that as well. So we envision revisiting our signal timing on the major arterials. In conjunction with that, we also would like to hire a contractor to install vehicle detection at critical intersections along those city arterials while they're doing the timing. So those lanes, the signal only responds to activity in those lanes where it just doesn't come up when nobody's there at critical locations. We don't have enough money to do everywhere in the city, but if we could pick critical locations that are kind of pinch points in terms of signal timing on these major arterials, we like to have the ability to do that as well. The real goal for any agency in doing their signal timing is to obviously move people along in the best way possible. But based on historical data, in my own experience over 25 years of this, is You generally can reduce your unnecessary stops, where you stop for no reason, whether it's traffic on the side street isn't even there, but you're stopping anyway, or just by improved signal timing, you can eliminate a lot of those unnecessary stops and reduce your travel delays by 10 to 20% during any peak period on any major arterial. That directly translates to less idling time and less fuel consumption from starting and stopping. Again, based on historical data, that can come up to 25,000 per signal per year. And then the same thing, less idle time in the corridor translates to lower vehicle emissions by 7,000 pounds per signal per year. One of the other byproducts of improved signal timing and what I envision for the city is we would go to some lower cycle lengths, which would translate to lower or shorter wait time for pedestrians that are waiting to cross at any one signal. All in all, envision this estimated at a $2 million cost for this project.
Hey, Jamie, is this related to the pucks as well? Is that what when you talk about pucks being able to detect traffic?
Yes, the vehicle detection we're talking about here is what most people can see is they look like hockey pucks. They're wireless in pavement sensors that you core out the asphalt, you drop in the vehicle sensor, the puck, and then you epoxy over it in the lane. It's basically a mini Wi-Fi network at every intersection. I want to install vehicle detection where we already have some existing infrastructure in place, so it's not cost prohibitive to do a project like this. So we're just going to add to what we have already. And yes, it would be those pucks that they appear to be at those intersections. The next project we're proposing is again to hire consultant engineers to design underground lighting vaults. We have about a dozen of these downtown. These are substations downtown where there's not as much space available above ground with all the buildings and all the things going on downtown. So we have a dozen of these downtown where they're underground. And as such, they have to stay open for the airflow so things don't overheat. And when you leave things open for airflow, you leave things open for water. So there's built-in drainage systems in each of these, but as you can see from these pictures, every time it rains any substantial amount, these substations fill up. They smoke, as the one picture shows. And even when they drain out over time, over 50 years, this equipment's basically hanging together with gum and whatever else we can get to hold together. So it's something that leads to not having a very reliable lighting system or lighting grid downtown. So we envision this project where engineers redesign the existing infrastructure to something of current technology, and also to have proper drainage systems built for those as well. And then likewise, a contractor to come in and actually build what they design. So the goal again is to provide some sort of updated equipment to current technology, where we could have a more stable grid where every time it rains, we don't have lights out downtown. And I think that everyone can agree the end result will be promoting a safer downtown experience with a more stable lighting system downtown. So we would estimate this project at about $2 million as well. The third project is what we call Traffic Management Enhancement Phase 5. As you can tell from the title, we've used this project title before. And in fact, it's even more so than that. Phase 5, we utilize the federal grants for this projects. These type of transportation projects is a transportation grant program through the federal government, where we've been doing this for 25 or 30 years now. It's essentially the only way cities like us can afford to do large scale improvements on any traffic signal corridors. It's hard to rebuild a traffic signal from scratch for $300,000. So you get a project like this, the feds will pay for 80% of the project total, and all the local municipality has to do is come up with the match, the 20% match to that project. So again, this is what we've used on every major corridor in the city that you can think of. And what we're envisioning for Phase 5 is to do this on MLK, where we have 7 signals that have never been touched with this federal program. So what we envision is the exact same model that we've used over the past 25 or 30 years, where you would have consultant engineers design these traffic signalized intersections. And this would go from Martin Luther King for the city limits to Grand. And then the contractors would build the final product. And that type of product would involve new above ground infrastructure, which is new traffic signal poles, new pedestrian stanchions, new ADA ramps, some critical underground conduit wiring. That's the same wiring that maybe has been there for 50, 70 years. New fiber optic communications, so we can actually link those signals up to our real-time crime center, where we have our traffic management server. So we can operate the traffic signals from this exact same laptop computer I'm talking to you right now on. And in addition, installing vehicle and pedestrian detection, push buttons at intersections, and those pucks we were talking about. It's a lot of things to do. And like I said, it's only possible through a project like this where the feds can pay 80% of it. So usually our biggest obstacle is coming up with the local match, which is 20%. The goal for this project would be to provide obviously updated equipment, get rid of the old 50, 70-year-old stuff, link our signals, like I said, so we're able to manage it from one central point remotely. And then also to provide those pedestrian ADA improvements along the corridor that are sorely needed. This project, while estimated at $4 million, we would only need $800,000 for our local match as our 20%.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. And for members of the committee, I did want to refresh your memory on some of these, particularly the streets and bridge projects where there is, where you are talking about simply the local match portion. And these are big bang for the buck type projects because you get a 4-to-1 match. And so to the extent you can get that to the award of funds, these dollars go a long way. Has this been applied for, or is it, so if we came up with the match, would the monies be available right away, or how's that work?
This has not been applied for yet. The applications aren't open yet, but they'll probably open in January and probably due in February or March. That's the usual cycle for this. And I should have added, the federal program is called Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. So it's CMAQ, CMAQ is the acronym for it. And like the signal timing project I mentioned earlier, one of the goals is improve signal timing on your corridor is also built into this. Less stops, less vehicle emissions, which leads to less congestion, which is what this project acronym is called, and improved air quality is the whole goal for that federal grant program.
Yeah, there's a question here in the chat from Katie. She says, hey, Jamie, can you refresh us on which of these projects were on last year's capital list, but didn't get funded and which are new?
Of these three, I know the underground lighting vaults were, I think I only had the some LED upgrades were on the first round of ARPA, and then the underground vaults. So only that one is another chance from last year.
You know what we might do, Katie, is just give you that list and then update it to where we can put a note that says which ones were on that from last year and which ones are new. We could do that as well. We can put that together for you.
So Paul, Jamie is correct that last year the only two in streets that were funded besides arterial street paving were the Tucker cycle track project and the LED street light conversion. So all these other projects Jamie just spoke of are holdovers from last year.
Okay. Thanks, Rich.
Right, good evening. I'm Kent Flake, Commissioner of Streets, here to talk about a little paving. Our first proposal would be North Broadway from Cole to city limits. It's about a 7.2 linear mile stretch with a pavement rating of 4.5. What that means is a brand new street's typically a 10. A dirt road's about a 0. I believe the last time that most of Broadway's been paved was between 18 and 20 years ago. Typically, we like to pave those every 8 to 12 years. It's the same for both North and South Broadway, which you'll see on the next slide. This will include paving. I've included in this price. It's about $2.3 million in actual paving, 1.6 million in ADA upgrades. That's mostly just wheelchair ramps. Could possibly be some other sidewalk issues along the way also, but it's mostly just making sure that the ADA ramps and wheelchair ramps at each intersection is up to the current standards. Out of all three of these projects, you'll hear pretty much the same thing. There's a little over $1 million that we're placing in here for possible traffic calming, whether that be actual concrete structural things in the street, whether that would be change in striping, a change in adding, or changing over the existing bike lanes in order to eat more road and to actually provide, slower speeds. We've had some major issues on North Broadway with speeding over the last several years. As many of you know, we have some really ugly Jersey barriers placed along pretty much from downtown up to almost East Grand. Hopefully with this project, we could remove those Jersey barriers and put some real traffic calming or something structural that looks better than a Jersey barrier, haphazardly strewn along the route. The good thing about all that would be, we can reduce traffic speeds, collisions, improve public safety, both pedestrian, bikes, vehicle, which is always the goal. And the overall project is about 5.9 million.
We have a couple questions, but before you get there, you mentioned the quality rating, the 4.5 out of the 10. Could you explain to the committee how that works and what's your current assessment, or how you go about assessing the quality of the street paving?
Yeah, historically, about every 3 or 4 years, we would have an inspector go out and rate every street in the city. Since we've been short on manpower for the last 4 or 5 years, we have not had a chance to do a more recent assessment. Our most recent assessment, I believe, is between 2014 and 2016. It's kind of a subjective matter, so it's good to keep the same employee doing it. If you have more than one employee, one person looks at the street and says, "Oh, this is a 7." This another employee looks at the same street and goes, "Oh, this is a 5." So it's good to keep the consistency of one person going through the entire city, so you can actually get consistent ratings. But yes, as I kind of mentioned earlier, like an average street is rated a 7. Once you get under a 5, that roadway definitely needs some work. You're going to have potholes, you're going to have cracking. Our street maintenance crews are going to start, once it's below 5, our street maintenance crews are going to start being on that street almost weekly in order trying to just keep it pieced back together. And that's another benefit of all this paving, is that releases my street maintenance crews to actually go out and patch other streets other than North Broadway or South Broadway, or what we're going to see here shortly on Florissant. Because currently with our staffing, any street that we don't have to go back to weekly is definitely a bonus. But a perfect street would be a 10. Pretty much the worst street you can drive on is either a 0 or 1. We usually give it a 1, just because it works better with calculations. And then like an average decent street that's got some cracking, occasional pothole, that's going to be around a 7.
Okay, thanks. So the 4.5 is pretty bad in terms of a rating.
Yes.
All right, let me really jump before some of the questions here. Set up a policy place. This is level treated. Okay, this is not real questions here. Anything else? Okay, does the $5.9 million budget include the extra traffic calming elements just mentioned? I'm unclear how that number was determined, if the actual elements are still to be determined.
That is a very good question. At this point, it's just a more of a study number, and will give us the opportunity to use it for either or a portion of it as a study to figure out what we need to put out there. At least on, I believe on most North Broadway, we're more than likely we're going to use similar to what the Jersey Barrier is doing now. With the BPS have been installing the trapezoidal bump outs here for the last 6 months to a year, and they seem to be working out very well. So that's a number that's pretty easy to come up with. But for budget purposes, we just essentially used a little over 1.1 million, between 1 and 1 million for all three of these projects. So we can at least get something on paper, so we can get it studied, and whatever we can do with that money, we will use for traffic calming.
And again, these all include ADA upgrades along the route, as it says.
So
That's
Paul,
correct.
just to add a couple comments on top of that. So as with many of these type of things, an engineer's estimates established in the beginning, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, and we will at BPS have to hire a consultant, and we will go through and take a look at other traffic calming measures that are being accepted and employed in other corridors, and we'll work with the street department to approve those. So to start with, at this point, we don't have that all designed and in place. We have to establish, a budgetary number to start with. Streets does the paving. We work with them on the ADA and the traffic calming and establish those numbers as we go. And also, the estimated cost is based on historical costs of other projects in that length and traffic calming we've done. So we feel comfortable. It's a pretty solid number to start with.
So South Broadway's next. It's gonna be all three of my slides are gonna be very similar. South Broadway is gonna start at the South City limits and proceed up to Shoto Avenue, which is about a 6.4 mile stretch. It's rated very similar to North Broadway because they're both paved, as mentioned earlier, about the same time. I think it was 18 to 20 years ago. So their ratings are very similar. There are portions of both North and South Broadway, I will mention this, that have had projects done on them or completed that will be excluded from this, and we will, from both an ADA standpoint, traffic calming standpoint, and a paving standpoint that have been done recently, that will be skipped if this is budgeted. But this is just the overall, and those aren't very large sections either, but generally we will skip them, but it also depends on what condition they are once we actually get to them. Because there's a section of South Broadway that had a traffic calming area put in along with North Broadway. But in general, yeah, this is going to be very similar to the previous one. Somebody may ask a question of why are we skipping from Shoto to Cole? That was just paved 2 years ago. Mostly by Ameren, and that's why we're skipping the downtown portion. But this project will also include the same ADA upgrades, the same street calming measures as the North Broadway section.
Let me ask you, assuming we get funding for these projects, how long does it take from once you start to get them finished? It's going to depend. The traffic calming studies, probably the traffic calming and the ADA ramp study will have to happen first. Once those are looked at, because every ramp on all of these routes have to be looked at to see if they're up to current standards. Rich and his team will have to look through and see if there are any current traffic studies or past traffic studies that were on these routes. And kind of the goal is, if
we're doing one thing is to continue that in other places. Then the last thing is my street maintenance side of actual paving. But typically the traffic study or the ADA study part, it's not that complicated. It's something a contractor can take care of or a consultant can take care of in the very short term. But when you start adding the traffic studies and traffic calming studies together, and you may have 3 or 4 different ones in a corridor, and trying to figure out how to blend those together, those take a little more time. And to get those traffic counts and everything else figured out also takes time.
Next time, fill up the ice container.
Rhonda.
Okay, thanks. And this is all done in-house? Your paving, at least your paving piece?
The paving's all done in-house. The ADA ramps are installed typically by Board of Public Service contractor. The review of ADA ramps and or the traffic consultants to come up with traffic calming is also usually through Board of Public Service and a consultant.
Okay, here's a question from Eric. Is there any appetite to look at design build for some of these projects? The amount spent on consultants is significant and the value is questionable.
Well, I'll take that one, Paul. So very first off the bat, what I will tell you is the city charter is very clear that we do design, bid, build. We do not do design build because it's prohibited by the city charter. But I'm also going to explain just a little bit about design build. So even in design build team, in that same format, you still have a licensed professional engineer working with a contractor, which is the consultants that we're referring to. And the reason that you have to have a licensed professional engineer is it's required by law that any time that you work in the public right of way, that things are properly designed and sealed by a licensed engineer in the state of Missouri. So Jamie and I are both licensed engineers. I have a staff of licensed engineers here. We hire consultants as a staff extension because of the amount of work that is done and the staffing that we have available. So our staff typically acts as project managers, program managers for these type of projects, and the consultants compete for these projects through our selection process, and they design them and seal them and provide all the proper documents. So when you talk about a significant cost and the value is questionable, the cost to design a project, I'm going to say of this nature here, could be 8 to 10% of the project cost. And the value is that we get a design by a professional engineering firm, and we are covered by law in what we do.
Thanks, Rich. Ron, I see you had a hand up. Did you have a question? I don't see your picture. Okay, we can come back if you're not there. Okay.
All
All
right.
right, Ken.
So fluorescent's the last one. It's a little weird boundaries, just because I wanted to get it all the way to Tucker. So it's actually fluorescent 13th, from Tucker to City Limits West, 5.8 linear mile stretch. That's also rated right around a 4.5, pretty much identical to the other two. This one is going to be about, once again, about $2.1 million in paving or asphalt for paving. $1.4 million in ADA cost. Another approximate 1.1 million for traffic calming and traffic studies along that corridor. With this one, it's a little different than the North and South Broadway, because there is a very wide stretch of fluorescent, pretty much from O'Fallon Cemetery to the western city limits. And that is definitely probably going to be higher on traffic calming and traffic study side. Because the traffic through there is a little faster north and south Broadway just because it is so wide. And I know there's been multiple studies on that corridor. And so I anticipate more of this going towards the traffic calming on this portion. Just because there has been so many concerns about the width of the street there. Because I mean, there's portions of Florissant here that are about 100, 110 feet wide, which with Jamie's traffic counts probably doesn't make any sense in 2022.
Okay, let me, got a couple questions. From Howard, MoDOT is doing a similar project on South Broadway from the city limits to I-255. Would partnering for a larger project possibly bring a better value, lower cost to the city?
Yeah, I'm personally not sure about that. I haven't heard anything about that project. I will certainly look it up after this meeting, but I'm not aware of what they're doing in that project.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, from Vanity, she has a question about, does the city have a standard process or policy for selecting consultants and firms for projects, or does it vary by department?
No, the selection process is advertised on the street. Consultants send in what is called a statement of qualifications. And we select on a process called QBS, which is qualification-based selection, which is dictated by the Brooks Act, which is a federal law for government selection of consultants. It is not based on cost. It is based on their qualifications. And all engineering and architectural projects go through that. That is ordinance 64103, which is that selection process. All non-engineering and architectural selection go through ordinance 64102, which is comprised of selecting on, could be on proposals, or it also could be on qualifications as well. But those are the two guiding ordinances which the city goes by. 64102, non-engineering and architecture, 64103, engineering and architecture.
Thank you, Rich. And there was also a follow-up from Eric. He was asking about the, you'd mentioned that charter provision about the design build. And he was asking about where he could find that, or what's the excerpt?
Yes, so what it refers to is, and we can certainly get that for you, it's the lowest responsible bid for a contractor. And responsible means a whole variation of things: bonding, insurance, business licenses, and other things. And as I just talked about, the process for selecting consultants is QBS by federal law. And so those are the two processes that are referred to. There is no mixture of those two processes. That is what design build is. And so therefore, we have gotten legal opinions in the past on this, and we are not allowed to do design build, nor do we do it.
Okay, thank you. All right, that was your last slide. Were there any other items that you had to discuss this evening for projects? Okay, let me bring back up. Let's see. Stop sharing this. Bring back up the capital needs inventory. So we back. And I'll share.
So Paul, if you would go to streets items number, let's see.
Yeah,
here.
I'm pulling those up now, so we can get these pulled up.
item number 10 on streets, if you will.
And that would be
So-
the ADA transition plan.
Sure, I'll just make a couple of comments to refresh that one while we're talking about streets. Also, David Newberger, who is our commissioner on the disabled, is also on this committee as well. And so a couple years ago, we embarked on doing an ADA transition plan in the city. Phase one, you know, as we could talk about for a long time here, it is required by the American Disabilities Act. And David worked very, very hard with previous administrations to get a transition plan in place for all programs and all sites owned by the city, whether it's streets, parks, whether it's in buildings or programs therefore. And the idea was, obviously, we have to have a transition plan in place. We have to be doing those things proactively so that, you know, obviously we're accommodating the people that have disabilities, but also by law, and the fact that if we're not doing those things, then the United States Justice Department should come in and direct us to do certain things at their direction. So David was very diligent to get that going. We have phase one moving along with my office. All the projects that Streets talked about tonight and all construction projects that we do go to David and his department for review so that when they go out, they are constructed in that manner. What this number does is, this is another lump sum number to add on to the transition plan phase one. And what David and my staff have worked on is, along with the consultant that has done this work, is to not only build the program, build the plan, but also begin to do some implementation of ADA locations around the city that are lacking. And so what this does is it keeps the program moving in the right direction. I mean, $2 million is a placeholder. It would be great to have $5 million or $10 million. And obviously it will cost a lot more than that and take many, many years to get the city fully in compliance with this. But what we are saying with this number is it is alive. We want to keep funding this program. We want to keep, you know, doing the things we need to do. And we will continue to do that in capital for years to come. And even after the program is obviously achieved, it'll probably be time to go back and start replacing things that have worn out over the years. So that's what that number is for. I don't think David can talk here, but if he could, I would like him to make a couple comments on that.
Yeah, I think my mic is open.
Great, you are.
Yeah, I think that the thing that is important for people to understand is that anything that we do, such as what Jamie and I'm dropping your name.
Kent.
Yes, are projects that we're saying the city will do. And when the city does any project, it's obligated to comply with the ADA in design and implementation. But in addition to that, there are many parts of our city that are not, nobody has a plan to touch or do anything about. There's no money being involved in them, and yet they are also barriers to access. And so the way I look at the $2 million is our picking up things that everybody else is not picking up. And we do that even though there's not some big central project connected to it. So, I mean, for example, we're working right now on something about making sure that the sidewalks are accessible at all the senior living centers in the city. You know, that's nobody is doing an arterial street paving in that connection, but we need to have those things done. So what we're trying to do with the transition plan is develop a system of priorities and create a program that is in addition to our general capital fundraising activities. And again, all of our general capital fundraising activities themselves to be in compliance. So when we do any sidewalk work or new streets or anything, then that's all done according to the standards, but not coming out of that 2 million.
Thank you, David. Here's a question from Katie. How do these projects relate to the city's FY23 capital improvement plan? I'll take a stab at that. Katie, and for the members, the benefit of the committee, we talked about the capital improvement budget guide earlier. All of these projects are over and above the current funding support that's provided through the regular FY23 capital improvement plan. We do have a small ability to address some projects on a pay-as-you-go basis based on the limited recurring sources of capital that we have. But as I mentioned before, when we talked about the additional sources we're discussing here with this potential appropriations, specifically for ARPA, as well as the prior year surplus, those things are not assumed to be recurring. So those funds are in addition to what we're able to do on the recurring basis. Over half of our capital budget, particularly our citywide budget, is for debt service on existing buildings and such, so that our discretionary portion of our budget is somewhat small. We do have funds allocated to parks because of the sales taxes for parks and such, and of course the ward capital, which gets half of the half-cent sales tax, which are more discretionary. But for these kind of larger citywide projects, the funding on the FY23 budget, as well as any annual capital budget, is extremely limited. So this is a unique opportunity given the funding sources that we're dealing with. And so that's why we've convened as many groups together as possible to get some significant and deferred capital maintenance done while we have the opportunity.
Okay, Paul, if you would drop down to item number 26 on streets, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Vanity. I see that question on that. Yeah, I will address that. Which number are you looking for?
Number 26, please.
26.
Thank
Okay,
you.
that's the Louisiana Calm Street Phase 2.
Right. So I talked about this one in the introductory meeting, the very first night. This is a project that is phase 2 of a project we're currently working on Louisiana Street. Between the phase 1 is between Gravois and Merrimack. The phase 2 is between Merrimack and Holly Hills. This would be a federally funded grant project. Like as Paul talked about, we would apply for a grant, the total project $2.2 million, and we would put up the local match share of $440,000. This project is it is a major traffic calming corridor on the south side. It is a pilot project as well with bump outs and traffic calming features and paving and so forth to slow down traffic. Many of the things that we're doing in this corridor here will be utilized in a number of other corridors throughout the city. As some folks may have heard, the mayor's office was talking about $40 million in ARPA funding going towards traffic calming around the city. And so that is not on this list, but what that is very similar to what we're doing on Louisiana Calm Street. And that would take many of the corridors that we identified in Board Bill 184 for simple paving, and it would add traffic calming and ADA features to those corridors, as well as it would look at some additional corridors around the city where traffic calming studies have been completed, and we're ready to do some design work before we actually do the actual construction implementation. So this project, again, would be part of this Biden infrastructure bill that's out there today. We think it is a very viable and eligible grant funded project. And what we're asking is to consider this $440,000 for a $2.2 million project, and we could finish up Louisiana Com Street on the south side.
Hey, Rich, I've seen Louisiana. Could you explain some of the, when we talk about traffic calming, what exactly that entails there in terms of the capital infrastructure of the street itself?
Right, so traffic calming could be a number of things, and Jamie's on here as well as the traffic commissioner. So Jamie, feel free to jump in here and supplement me. But at the end of the day, it's things like, you know, going to lane diets to make the street somewhat narrower, to slow traffic down. It is bulb outs at intersections, which make the street narrower and easier for pedestrians to cross. It is enhanced signalization as well. It could also be some painted stripes in the street. But there are a lot of variations of traffic calming that could be utilized depending on the corridor. And we have done a number of them over the years. Previous to now, those have been funded through ward capital dollars by the alder persons at their request. And the mayor's office is very passionate about getting together a citywide study and funding citywide traffic calming to generally slow traffic down and, you know, reduce fatalities and driver accidents. So Jamie, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
You actually hit it pretty good there, Rich. It's really the phase one Calm Streets project was a host of different traffic calming features. I think you hit most of them, the bump outs, which reduce the pedestrian crossings, limits their exposure to traffic, speed humps, traffic circles, a whole slew of them, dividers at intersection entryways, so people don't come sweeping into turns or into the corridor at a high speed. So it's all about reducing speed and improving traffic safety, as Rich noted.
Here's a question from Vanity. Are there follow-up studies after traffic calming measures are implemented to assess the efficacy of the efforts?
Jamie, you want to take that one?
Yeah, we've started doing that. Recent example is MoDOT, after they did their Natural Bridge project, started accumulating data. What you want to watch with a lot of these projects or any data, especially with crashes, with crash history, is to let a good number of years come together. Yeah, I would say at the very least, you'd want a good 3 years of data before you start drawing any conclusions. You obviously can grab some data earlier, but you're going to have a list of caveats to that. But that is one of the goals, is we actually get the funds to start doing projects like this, especially as Rich noted, not on a this spot or that spot, but on a more whole scale approach. We'll now have the opportunity, because we built things, to actually go back and study them and be able to verify and quantify those safety improvements, which would probably most likely be in the form of lower crash histories, less property damage, less fatalities, less injuries, and all of that. So now that we have the potential to get this money, do these projects, we will also be afforded the opportunity to go back and study those improvements. So we haven't had as many opportunities to do that until this time.
Hey, let me ask you guys about the arterial paving in terms of which one's selected and all. Just to refresh everyone's memory, in Board Bill 184, we have provided funding for Union, Grand Avenue, Kings Highway, Jefferson, Goodfellow, and now we're talking Broadway. Most of those, again, are north-south corridors. So I was curious about the status of our east-west corridors, those which would be leading from the downtown out or something like that. I'd like to say all of. What's the status of those, and where do they rate in terms of condition?
Oh, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a lot of our east-west corridors are state maintained, so that's a benefit.
Okay.
Our east-west corridors are, I would say, just off the top of my head, slightly better than the north-south corridors, because most of those aren't as wide is the north-south corridors. So throughout history, some of those have had large sections paved through Aldermanic Ward Capital.
All right, thanks. Question here. Here's Katie, and it says, the projects we're talking about today don't appear to align with department priority. Cass is listed as number 1 and Whole Street is number 3. Why are we not hearing about those?
So I will just talk about that for just a second. So it appears that CAS is going to be funded from another source that is not 100% firmed up. And it was not 100% firmed up when we put this list together. But Paul, you might want to comment on that one.
Yeah, let me jump in on the Cass Avenue. Those projects, both of those projects related to the NGA expansion on the near north side. There was just recently completed a refinancing of some debt that was incurred when the NGA project was first entered into. That was the site preparation and such. And in doing so, that allocated funds for the main roadways, Cass particular, around the NGA site. So we don't anticipate that those two projects, although they remain a priority, would be funded through this process. It's being funded through that financing process. I don't know about the Hall Street. The Hall Street still remains a critical priority, Rich. I mean, I think that's one of yours that you discussed early on, but.
I did, and what that is that is a section of Hall Street from Adelaide to Riverview. It is a Project Clear project from MSD, and it is a partnership with MoDOT. And the idea there is Hall Street floods. That is a major economic corridor in the city of St. Louis. The idea is to build drainage along the outsides of Hall Street through MSD. MoDOT is to restripe and do some traffic calming effects within the paved area itself. The problem is between those two entities on a city street, they were short about $5 million from the grant funding that they had all received. I didn't cover it tonight because we talked about it in the first meeting. If something was really, there from the last time and there was any questions, we could address it. But that in general, we were going to really cover new things, which we have been doing. But thank you for bringing those up because it is a priority and we do have about a $5 million delta in order to help them complete that section.
Going down the list here. Okay. All right. Did we have any other questions for our guys from streets? See any? Okay. We did break up in terms of topics to go over and categories to go over. We also have the bridge category, and we've got that set for next week. Rich's guys over at BPS usually put together a pretty good presentation, and they can show you what our bridge repair needs are and the matching requirements are of those. That's also a lot of federal funding related to some of those larger projects. And we can go over that, and that the plan is to do that next week. After that, if there are particular, we didn't want to, looking forward to the rest of the list, we weren't, as in last year, we weren't going to go through all the more tedious buildings and things like that. For instance, civil courts and all that. We do have items identified on this capital needs inventory, but we're going to bring in a whole presentation and show you the pictures of the pipes again and all. But if there are any other of these areas what you'd like to see, let us know, and we can invite that department to present in particular. But like I said, next week, we're going to be talking about bridges. And so that's an important piece of the puzzle here. As Rich could tell you, we've got some significant needs in the bridge categories. So unless there are any other questions for streets tonight, we will end the meeting a little early than usual, and then hope to see you here next week at the same time to a discussion for streets. Oh, I see a raised hand. Alderwoman Boyd has joined us. Pam Boyd.
No, I just want to congratulate Streets for giving a phenomenal presentation and answering questions, because it's good, because the citizens are here, and that's good. That shows that you all are concerned and you're trying to make sure that you're transparent as possible. So thank you guys very much. Thank you, Rich Bradley.
Thank you, Alderwoman Boyd. For those of the members of the committee, Alderwoman Boyd is also chairperson of the Ways and Means Committee, and as such, she sits in on the city's capital committee. So thank you for joining us, Alderwoman Boyd. There's another question. Yeah, there's how many meetings are scheduled for the remaining months? I don't see that anywhere. The one scheduled, we would have at least a couple more meetings. We haven't determined that exact number yet, Vanity. The idea would be we'd cover bridges next week, and then any other departments that anyone would like to hear from after that would be the following week, and then we could start surveying the group to see where they are in terms of priorities and recommendations for the capital committee. So that's what. So when we started, we figured we'd have maybe 4 or 5 meetings going in, and then survey where the committee is and what they would like to see as priority funding areas. So that's where we're at now. And then Howard, for clarifications, the priorities in the list, the department's priority based on criticality or number. From the departments, it was for criticality. And basically, which ones do they see as most needing to have funded? I believe that's where they were coming from. That may not necessarily be how you as a member of the committee believe. Or if there's some other project that you believe you'd like to cover, that would be also a way to offer your input into this process. And we will do that at the end once we get through the presentations, so that we will reach out to you all as a means for soliciting that information, so we can get that to the capital committee so we can begin to have its meetings. Well, if there's nothing further, again, I would like to thank you all for attending this evening's meeting. I know it's hard to get together and take a moment out of your time to spend here. There's a lot of material to go over, but I'd like to thank you for your time and efforts, and we'll see you here again, same time next week. Thank you all.